Last week, we explored the first half of the Dark Knight story in Heavensward. The entire story spans from level 30 to 60, but this part will cover the second half, which is level 50 to 60. If you haven't watched the first part, I highly recommend you do. After all, part 1 generally comes before part 2. Now, after our harrowing experience with Frey, some of the knights around Whitebrim are a little bit nervous around us. Even though Lord Drillamon ordered that the events that happened here will be forgotten and never spoken of again, there are some who see us as evil or heretics, and they wish nothing more than to get rid of us, even if it means going behind their lord's back. One of these knights asks us to assist him with a matter at the Behemoth's domain, only to then turn on us along with his brothers. We strike them down, all except the original knight, who then starts sprouting threats towards us, only for a surprising person to join our rather one-sided violent discussion. This aura is Sidurgu, who thankfully is just called Sid throughout this quest line, and I'm gonna stick with that because I find this name a little bit hard to pronounce. So Sid shows up, threatens the knight, which sends him off fearing for his life. After all, now he is facing not just one Dark Knight, but 2. And Sid is a little bit bigger than I am. Sid tells us that he and Frey were friends, and when he heard of someone wielding his fallen friend's sword, he got curious. He asks us what happened to Frey, but we sadly must tell him the truth, which might be that we have either somehow had our inner darkness temporarily possess his dead friend's body, or we were just wildly hallucinating, at least for part of the time, while dragging the dead body around. It's more likely to be the first, but I still think the second one is kind of funny. But after explaining the whole thing with Frey and how our inner darkness works, Sid is rather impressed by how much we have learned, and he does seem familiar with our experience with the inner darkness, noting that all Dark Knights are a little bit broken. Then he asks us to meet with him at the Forgotten Night in Isgard. When we do meet with him there, we learn he is not alone. In fact, he has an Ellison girl with him. Her name is Riel, and she is the one who refers to him as Sid. Sid starts by reminding us what it means to be a Dark Knight. And it means to be an outcast, to be hated. No matter if you do what is right, you will be seen as an outsider, a criminal even. One to be executed, just like Frey was. One of Sid's main points is that mercy is wasted upon our foes. The knight who tried to kill us before, we let him go free. But Sid saw it as a waste and apparently tracked him down on his way to Isgard and killed him. He emphasizes that we should not hesitate to do such a thing, as our enemy would not hesitate to kill us. He emphasizes this by telling us a little bit about his past. When he and his Aura tribe first came to this land, they were refugees fleeing the Empire. But the people of Isgard saw their scales and thought they were Dravanians. The Aura were attacked by some of the people of Isgard, but in the end the Aura got away, and they spared those who attacked them, only for the Isgardians to return later with the knights, and slaughter all of them, men, women, and children. And for this reason, mercy is something we can't afford. But moving from this rather sad topic, he tells us that he and Frey used to train together. They shared the same master, who recently passed away, but before he died, he spoke in riddles, talking about a flame in the abyss. The abyss being some sort of an ability or power they have yet to get, but they were unsure what the master meant, which led to them heading out to seek out the meaning and ending up here in Isgard. On the journey, they encountered Riel, the young Ellison girl who has just been standing there and staring at us without a word. She's not very talkative. When they met her, she was fleeing the Temple Knights, and the Dark Knights took offense to that. But the price for saving her life was being marked for death by the Night Order, which is how Frey ended up on the trial, while Sid and Riel have been staying hidden for now. But luckily Sid has now found us, so we also agree to help protect Riel. And I mean, Sid seems to need all the help he gets because his chosen hiding place to hide from the knights is the inn right next to the congregation of our knight most heavenly, which is basically the headquarters of the knights. And the pair aren't even hiding in a back room, they're just kind of there out in the open. So yeah, they need some help. We try to question the girl about her situation, but she doesn't tell us very much. She tells us that the knights claim she is an abomination, and therefore she must die. But when we try to ask her about her parents, we don't get many answers. But she makes one request of us, to look after Sid, and we of course promise to do so. Now, Sid is unsure what makes the girl be seen as an abomination, so we need to figure out the cause of this issue. Together we head up to the Sea of Clouds. There are stories of the Vanu healers. They have the ability to see a person either, so maybe they could help us? We pay the healer with some Gastornis feather, and he agrees to take a look at Riel. Observing her, he claims that there is a great spirit within her, but before he can explain anything further, he realizes we have been followed by something he called Tramontane and flees away. Apparently Tramontane seems to be the Temple Knights, because those are the people that come and attack us. And by the time we slay them, the healer is long gone, meaning that we can do little than return to our hiding place in Isgard. And as we sit at the bar, Sid is still pondering the great spirit within Riel. Now, if it's a spirit, he believes that maybe we should talk to the people who talk to spirits, and that would be the conjurers of Gridania. In fact, Frey was teaching Riel some conjury during their travels, and he said she had a natural talent for it, meaning most likely somewhere in her family line were some strong conjurers. So we must make our way to Gridania, but it does come with a risk. It seems that while our hiding place is pretty terrible, the knights have no interest in attacking us within the city. I guess it will look kinda bad if they go killing innocent children, especially because the goal does not seem to be to arrest the girl, instead simply to strike her down. So what they're doing is they're watching us from a distance, waiting for us to leave the city, so they can ambush us on our travels. And it's no surprise that we have barely made it past Camp Dragonhead when we are attacked. At the time, Sid is traveling a little bit ahead to make sure the way is clear, but thankfully Riel and us are able to handle them, as the girl is actually a pretty good conjurer, managing to heal us as we strike down the knights, all except the one who escapes. As we meet up with Sid again, we quickly cross the border and head into Gridania, where we meet Brother Isumiyan at the Conjurer Guild. He of course agrees to examine her and notes that she indeed has a unique spiritual presence, one that is very powerful, but not because of training, but more natural, something she was born with. It is a presence similar of the elementals, or, well, more likely in her case, the Dravanians. Brother Isumiyan tells us there is an old Isgardian legend about how if one ingests the bloods of a dragon, he will become a dragon himself. And there is a chance that maybe Riel at some point drank some dragon blood, maybe of an ancient Dravanian. We all look at her, but she doesn't speak up at this time. In fact, she doesn't talk at all until we get to the Caroline Canopy, when Sid starts pressing her for answers. And she tells us about the time she was imprisoned in a windowless cell, how the walls were so thick that she could not even hear the rain. But she promises that she has never drank dragon blood, but her captor, a woman, kept her locked up, claiming that it was simply better this way, to keep her like this. And while the knights might hunt her and kill her, he would rather face that than go back to the cell. Sid is frustrated with her answer, but he tells her he is never letting that happen. He is not letting her die, and he is not letting her be put back in that cell. So we return to Isgard to try to figure out our next move. And it's back at the inn that Sid has an idea. If it's true that Riel has some Dravanian blood, or Dravanian spirit, wouldn't the easiest way to confirm it by simply talking to the Dravanians? And lucky for him, we actually know the dragons. So we bring them to speak to Vidofnir in Annick's shrine. Luckily this time, we are not ambushed on the way, but the dragon asks us to go gather up some flowers. And of course we agree. The flower name is Gronalm, which roughly translates to calming tree in the dragon tongue, and we are told to bring these flowers to a dying dragon. And when we do, the dragon recognizes Riel. Or, well, part of her. It turns out that either one of both of her parents drank dragon blood, more specifically the blood of the dying dragon's lover. And it seems that blood was then passed on to her during birth. The dragon asks Riel to fly free, to live on, and while she agrees to do so, we can see that Sid is absolutely devastated to know the truth. This confirms that Riel will never be safe. The Temple Knights will never stop hunting her. He curses his inability to harness the abyss his master talked about, and when he does, it piques the dragon's curiosity. And after we explain the concept of a dark knight to the dragon, she seems amused, saying that even the tiny beings frolicking about the mists of Somal know a better way than this silly, dark art of ours. But she does not tell us anything more, so at last we return to Isgard to process the news and decide on our next plan. But when we are back at the inn, we are visited by no other than Riel's mother. This is Istrid de Kulignot. She is a noble within the city and a woman of high standing with the church, as most of her family has been in the past. She was married and with her husband had Riel, but eventually it was discovered that her husband was a heretic, one who had been drinking the dragon blood for decades. When she confronted him, he downed a final vial of blood and finished his transformation, before trying to kill his wife. But he was killed by the knights before he managed to, but that left a child she had with a heretic, a child whose the dragon blood has tainted. An abomination. Istrid locked up her daughter, but now that the child is free, she has decided that the only way to absolve herself of the sin of having consorted with a heretic is by killing her own daughter. It has been her knights who have been chasing us. It is her knights that killed Frey. And now she challenges Sid for trial by combat, and he accepts. She tells us we will get a message soon enough about when and where the trial will be held. And then she leaves, though not before Riel calls her mother, only for the woman to tell the child to never call her that again. When we're alone, Riel begs Sid to avoid the trial, fearing he will be killed, but he is determined. He swore to protect the girl, and he intends to do so. But he's also no fool. No, he needs to be stronger to survive the trial. And the only clue we have are those tiny beings up in Somal that could maybe teach us how to harness the abyss. And luckily for him, we are very familiar with those tiny fluttering beings. After all, they live in Mockholm. And while Moguls are probably as far from Dark Knights as you might imagine, they are still able to help us. We meet with a Mogul named Moggi, and he is, according to himself, the second most well-informed Mogul in Mockholm. And he says he can help us. So we bring Riel and Sid to him. But when Sid tries to get the girl to greet the Mogul, the usually quiet girl suddenly erupts with rage. She yells at him for his obsession with the darkness, how he keeps on telling her this is all for her good, while he throws himself into one fight after another, leaving her to patch him up in the end. And all this yelling seems to trigger an idea in Moggi, who suddenly remembers an ancient Mogul named Mog, who used to dance, and that is apparently the key to this whole darkness abyss business. So if we want to learn it, Riel will have to stay with the Moguls, while we and Sid will have to perform a trial, which includes gathering up Pomsworth, which is a flower And while we go about finding the flower, we can actually find Sid picking them as well and generally just yelling in anger, which I find quite amusing. But when we return to Moggy with the flower, he tells us there is actually a second part to the trial. Yes, we have to kill some Tulihans. And I'm getting a feeling he's just making this up as he goes. But there's not much we can do. Riel is no longer with him and we have to get him to help us. So we go kill those things as well. And after taking down the critters, we meet up with Sid, as we are both ambushed by muggles, who show up with evil laughter and claim they have kidnapped Riel, and the Sid will never see her again. And predictably, Sid absolutely loses his shit. We fight the muggles, and afterwards Sid demands they return Riel to him, only for them to ask him why. Why does he care about the girl? Isn't she just a burden on him? The reason his friend is dead? And then they pull out a full-blown musical number, which is sadly not voice acted, but the choreography is pretty impressive. But through their dance and song, they explain that the only thing Sid needs to fight is love. And honestly, when I first started playing a Dark Knight, there is nothing that you could have said to convince me that at some point we would have a Muggle musical number about love as part of the questline. And I mean, Sid is just as baffled as I am. But after the song, Riel does return, and she finally speaks her mind properly. She tells Sid that he only helps her to further his own goal. His goal of gaining power to take revenge on the Temple Knights. He isn't fighting for her, he's fighting for himself. And he just keeps on putting the blame on her because that is much easier. But it's a lie. The only person he's fighting for is him. Sid is stunned. He thinks about it for a minute and then he agrees. It has all been for himself. All he has done has been for his master, his mother and father, for those he lost, but most of it has just been for himself. He decides that he will fight in the trial, but when it ends, it will be up to Riel what happens next. And as we make our way back to Isgard, we'll get to learn a little bit more about the time Sid's parents were killed. When the Isgardians attacked the Aura clan, everybody was captured. But the Isgardians said they were merciful, and therefore let the people choose in which order they would die. Sid therefore got to watch his parents get executed, and when he was to face the same fate, a dark figure appeared and saved him. At the time, Sid was around the same age as Riel is now, and he was lucky enough to meet his master who saved him, who would mentor him, and now he sees that he has been using his master's noble ideals to excuse his indulgence and vengeance. And he recognizes that Riel has nobody but him. He now stands in the role his master was in all those years ago, the one guiding a young child in a horrible situation. And while Sid does not feel worthy of the task, he will finish the trial, and he will stand by her side as long as he would let him. We don't have to wait long for the missive, as we soon get news about the place and time of the trial. Predictably, Riel's mother wants this to be discreet, so the trial will happen out in the wastes of the Western Highlands, far away from any prying eyes. And for one last time, we set out with Sid and Riel. At the start of this questline, the girl was rather quiet, but throughout her experience and time with Sid, she seems to have grown more determined and confident. And it's clear Sid does respect her for it. We meet up with the street and her knights, but when the trial starts, the fight is far from fair. She has brought a variable army with her, and while we do find ourselves victorious, it was not an easy fight, and we probably would not have survived if Riel didn't have her healing magic. But in the end, all of the knights have fallen, and even Istrid is now kneeling in the snow. Sid goes up to her, preparing to strike her down before stopping. Because no matter her crimes, she is still Riel's mother. But Istrid just laughs madly, claiming no matter what she will never stop chasing Riel. Not till she has killed her, as in her eyes it is the will of Halone the Fury herself. Riel steps up, and in a kindness gives her mother her final rites, praying that she will find kindness and peace in Halone's hall. And for a moment, right before Sid's blade strikes the woman, we can see her looking at the daughter with maybe something that isn't pure hate. But finally, on the snowy fields of the Western Highlands, surrounded by corpses, stand two dark knights and a girl, before turning back, heading for one last time to Isgard. Back at the inn, Sid tells us that the power of the abyss came to him. All he needed to do was let go of his hatred, to focus on his true task, which was protecting Riel. And he hates to say it, but maybe the Mughals were a little bit right. When Riel is asked what she wants to happen in the future, she tells us that she is still willing to remain in Sid's company, but not as his charge, but as a friend, someone he talks to, someone he shares his thought with, so they can share the burden together. And for now, they plan to remain in Isgard. Well, we will head on to our next adventure. For finishing the questline, we are given our first proper Dark Knight armor, and it is quite pretty, isn't it? And then Sid asks us a final question. He asks us for whom we will stand. Will it be for our friends, for Eorzea, or perhaps ourselves, or the one within? Mine answer was for my friends. But what about you? What was your answer to the question? Let's talk about it down in the comments. And while you're down there, maybe throw me a commentation by liking and subscribing. And in the end, all I want to say is takk fyrir að horfa og eigðu yndislegan dag.